apologies if you're getting slightly sick of the apprenticeship content, but I think we've got a really good lineup. So thank you to both of our speakers. Just quickly before we start, as part of ERSA's grant agreement with the Youth Futures Foundation, we're taking part in some research with RAND Europe, and as part of that research, they're doing a deep dive into this forum, and I believe Emily is in the forum, and she's just going to briefly introduce herself and tell you a little bit about that.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name's Emily McLeod, and I work at RAND, like Jack said. So all it is RAND is doing an observation of the youth forums that ERSA is doing, because we're interested in how ERSA uses their grant and shares good practice in terms of that youth employment space. So I'm not here to make judgment or pass any judgment at all. I'm just here to make some notes and observations about how the youth forums work, what they do. As an additional request, we would like to speak to just one, probably only one, maybe two of you, attendees of a youth forum. So if you're here today, even better if you've attended a youth forum previously, it would be great to speak to one of you. It would probably only take half an hour, like just an online chat in the next week or so. We're just interested in, what the youth forums are, how you use them in your organisation. So if you're interested in speaking, that would be really helpful. Please, I'll put my email in the chat. That might be the best way to do that. And then you can give me an email. There's absolutely no need to if you've got a busy week ahead of you, but it'd be interesting to get to know some of your organizations a bit more. So thank you very much. If you've got any questions, please reach out to me. But I'm just going to be here in the background making some notes. Thank you. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you very much, Emily. Okay, so without further ado, onto the agenda. First up, we have Anna Ambrose, who's the co-founder and director of Workwhile. And she's going to tell us a little bit about their apprenticeship program. So I will hand over to Anna.
Lovely, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all today. Even though the weather is grim, it's lovely to have the chance to talk to you all. So I will just start my slides, so hopefully you can all see those okay. So I'm Anna Ambrose. I am director and co-founder of Workwhile. We are also a Youth Futures Foundation infrastructure grantee. So nice to see Rand on the call as well. We've done our own deep dive work on some of our projects as well. So that's a funny overlapping coincidence. So for those of you not familiar with us, I will just introduce Workwhile briefly before I talk specifically about our apprenticeship creation work in London, which is what Jack's asked me to talk about, with a particular focus on some of our levy transfer work. So for those not familiar with us, we are a not-for-profit initiative. We are incubated and hosted by a larger charity, IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research. We're on a journey towards becoming an independent charity in our own right, hopefully over the next 12 months or so. And we work with employers to create good work and to ensure that everyone can access it. So our kind of niche, I suppose, in the system is very much in employer-facing work. So kind of complementing, I hope, the work that lots of brilliant people in the system do, supporting individuals to access work. Our priority is around making sure that there is good work for those people to access and that employers are creating great opportunities. And a lot of that focus at the moment, which will make sense when I talk a little bit about our background, a lot of that focus is around apprenticeship creation. And our vision is of a more equitable world of work. We exist for reasons which I think are very, very familiar to everyone on this call. But, that sense that whilst talent is everywhere, access to good work opportunities are really unequally distributed across society. So we know that disadvantaged and marginalised groups are far more likely to be in insecure, low paid, unstable, and otherwise poor quality work than other groups. And that's true for those who are disadvantaged in the labour market by their ethnicity, by their gender in specific sectors. And it's even more the case when we think about those disadvantaged by disability, by neurodiversity, because they are care experienced, all those kinds of things, which I know are really familiar to all of you on this call. I'll talk a little bit about our kind of broader portfolio of work in a moment, but apprenticeships, as I say, are right at the heart of what we do, because they offer, high quality opportunities when they're done well. because they give people that ability to earn and learn, which can make them a really accessible way to build skills at the same time as working. And because they offer the highest dividends in terms of pay and progression to the most disadvantaged learners. And we really want to make sure, therefore, that it is the people and the businesses who can benefit the most who are able to access apprenticeships. And so you can kind of set our work, I suppose, against the fact that, as again, I'm sure we're all really familiar with, we've had that drop in apprenticeships at lower levels for young people and in SMEs particularly. So there's just a little bit in terms of our apprenticeship specific impact here. So since 2020, with our work focusing mainly in London, not exclusively now, but primarily in London, we've created over 1,750 new apprenticeships, working with about 425 SMEs. And we've supported the transfer of over £15 million worth of unspent levy funds to support those apprenticeships, so to get that funding where it can really make the most difference for people. And our focus isn't solely on young people, but 60% of those apprenticeships we've created have benefited disadvantaged young people. Again, 60% have benefited people from Black, Asian and other minoritised ethnic backgrounds. 15% of the apprenticeships we've created have been accessed by young people who've been unemployed or NEET. And another 5% have enabled people to move from part-time into full-time employment. And again, I don't think any of you, particularly during National Apprenticeships Week, need me to kind of highlight what some of those stories of impact look like, but just a really nice quote to illustrate, I think, particularly the impact of this work. You know, I think we somehow feel sometimes that the pandemic is behind us, but in terms of young people's experiences of moving into work, you know, I think they are definitely still feeling that kind of lack of work experience opportunities over that period, etc., and the impact that that has had for them. So we want to talk a little bit about our kind of journey to this point, which I think hopes to kind of make sense of the work that we're doing. So we've grown out of a pilot project called the LPC, or the London Progression Collaboration, which took place between 2020 and 2022. Was focused very much around the creation of apprenticeship opportunities for low paid and low skilled Londoners. So we were funded partly through Mayor of London through the GLA and partly through JP Morgan Foundation, so some philanthropic funding there. And really we're looking at the kind of twin challenges in London of skills gaps in some specific and really important sectors in the capital, and barriers to progression into an in-work experience by low paid and low skilled Londoners. And we've really grown from that pilot. So we have now a broader funder base, enabling us to do a wider portfolio of work. Still, as I said, largely focused in London, but also with some work in the Northwest that's funded by the DFE, as you can see there. And to kind of bring that together, we renamed ourselves Workwhile and launched that back in July last year. And as I said, that initial pilot was conceived and funding secured for it back in 2018-19 before we launched in 2020, at which point some of the initial challenges around the apprenticeship levy, which many of you were probably warning about before the levy policy was even implemented, were becoming really apparent. So we were already seeing that massive drop in apprenticeships offered by small businesses. We were also seeing huge amounts of levy funding looking as though they were going to be unspent. And for London in particular, the implication of that was felt to be, because London has a lower, or historically has a lower level of apprenticeship starts per head of population than some of the regions of the UK, the concern from the GLA was that effectively that was kind of funding that might flow out of the capital to some extent. And you know, there are particular challenges around progression into an in-work for Londoners who don't have level 3 and 4 qualifications, etc. So those were some of the kind of motivations behind the GLA wanting to support the pilot. We were initially supporting apprenticeship creation specifically at levels 2 to 4, and to start with very specifically in construction, retail and hospitality. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the other things we did in response to COVID-19, but one of those was make a plea to our funders that we could work across any sectors who wanted our support. at that point, we were offering a really practical support service for smaller businesses or non-levy paying businesses to help them navigate the apprenticeship system. So looking to address that challenge that had become apparent around kind of capacity and expertise to navigate a new and arguably more complicated system, and also looking at that redistribution of unspent levy funds. We launched in February 2020, one of the kind of last in-person events before those things became impossible. So we were thrown pretty much immediately into COVID-19, and it was really this period which I think made us look really closely at the potential of levy transfer as a really central kind of enabler of our work. So of course, when lockdown first hit, we couldn't be out there or even on calls on the phone, anything, talking to small and medium-sized businesses about taking on apprentices at that point. So we had to think really carefully about what we could usefully be doing. And what we did find was that large employers, a lot of those who we'd already spoken to a bit about levy transfer, they'd perhaps been a bit cautious, a bit reticent, they were being pushed to do something to help in the kind of pandemic circumstances, whilst also, of course, in many cases having real challenges of their own about how their business was going to navigate that period. And levy transfer was a really great vehicle at that point to kind of meet that need. So we were asking levy payers to pledge a sum of funds to us for transfer, which we could then match up with small businesses as soon as they were able to begin operating again. And we saw that demand, you know, first of all, I think from businesses who suddenly realised that they needed to develop their digital capacity. So we saw all kinds of businesses coming forward looking for support around that. Obviously, some of the sectors which were operational and able to reopen a little bit earlier, then kind of looking at how they restaffed, upskilled, kind of got over that period when they'd had to have lots of staff on furlough and had perhaps lost people, etc. And then with a wider reopening, obviously kind of creating additional demand there. But it really was that period which of kind of wondering what on earth we could do in those circumstances when we were supposed to be kind of out there talking to small businesses, that really kind of galvanised the focus around how levy transfer could kind of facilitate this. And the Reskilling the Recovery was the campaign that we initially launched to enable that. And that has grown really into what is now our kind of wider package of support. So we offer end-to-end apprenticeship support for non-levy paying businesses, taking people right from, I think I've heard about an apprenticeship and I don't really know much more. And we have lots of conversations there with businesses for whom an apprenticeship isn't the right solution, and we will signpost them elsewhere. But we can do that piece of getting over some of the myths that are still out there about apprenticeships, etc. And we can then, for those who do want to move forward, support them through the process. So identifying what the right apprenticeship standards are for the gaps in their business, thinking about how to choose an apprenticeship training provider. So we're not a provider ourselves. We don't have a kind of approved list, because we think it is about the match of an individual business and their specific needs and the needs of maybe a learner if they've got somebody already in mind, with a training provider who can meet those needs. So what we do is support small businesses to think very carefully about what they want to ask of providers and what suitable provision for them and their learner is going to look like. We help lots of businesses to find their way around registering and using the DAS, the Digital Apprenticeship Service. We don't ourselves recruit candidates. We took the decision, having thought about that and kind of evaluated whether that was the right thing for us to be doing, took the decision that there are so many portals out there where people can advertise apprenticeships to different groups for different sectors, etc., that the last thing anybody really needed was another one from us. So we do an awful lot of signposting. You know, we find that a lot of the small businesses that we work with really want to recruit, you know, young people who might not necessarily have had a kind of easy journey towards finding their feet in the workplace, or from, you know, groups who are different to those that are typically represented in the sector, etc., but really don't know kind of where to look and how to do that. So we do a lot of signposting to organisations who they can work with on that, including relationships with some kind of pre-employment training providers in London who have candidates looking for those opportunities. We then still do the brokerage of levy transfer funding. So for small businesses, that is access to full funding to cover the costs of their apprenticeship training and assessment. And we will match them with one of our levy paying employers. And for the levy donors, I'll talk through kind of how we talk to them about why they might want to do levy transfer in a moment. But alongside that, we also have a wider programme of work So we offer line management training for the line managers of young apprentices, with the aim of improving progression outcomes for those learners ultimately. We've just in the process of completing a pilot of that programme. We have a knowledge sharing network to kind of share best practice across our networks, and various other pieces of work ongoing as well. So we've been developing a kind of good work health check, which we use with employers for a particular place-based project in East London, but are also looking to roll out more widely to kind of look to improve the quality of work for apprentices beginning those programmes as well. So, having been asked to talk a little bit about our levy transfer work particularly, I wanted to talk about kind of how we talk to large businesses. So we work with about 120 large employers, some of whom are London boroughs who have their own levy underspends which they want to use to support local residents and businesses, but also, you know, large employers across a huge range of different sectors. How we talk to them about doing levy transfer, because ultimately they can just sit there and do nothing with those unspent funds. So from our perspective, if they're going to spend, you know, not money on it, we don't charge them a fee. That's covered through our philanthropic funding, but nevertheless we're asking somebody to spend time on something. We have to be making a pretty good case as to why that's something that is something that they should want to do. So we talk to them about taking control of those funds. So, you know, yes, we know that most, if not all, of those unspent funds, if they go back to Treasury, are going back into the skills system, but that doesn't enable a business to kind of take a conscious decision about where they want those to be used and how they feel that they can make a really big positive impact. So we talk about enabling those funds to make a positive impact without having a kind of bottom line cost. So, you know, organisations obviously are committing budgets, CSR activities, etc. And this is a really great way of kind of complementing that with something that doesn't affect the bottom line. And we talk to businesses about how they can use levy transfer to support their own strategic objectives. So, you know, there is pretty much complete freedom for businesses to use those transfer funds to support apprenticeships in whatever way is meaningful for them. And I've just got some illustrations as to what that kind of alignment between levy transfer and strategic objectives looks like in reality, just to make that a bit more tangible. So the first example here, so we want to support residents and businesses in the places we build, including helping sectors like early years and social care, which everyone depends on. That's a large construction firm who are thinking about kind of place making and how they make you know, how they make communities in the places where they're doing large building projects. So that's you know, one really tangible way that a large organisation is thinking about it. The second example here is something that we see quite a lot, which is businesses thinking about their own diversity, equity, inclusion strategies and how they can align perhaps the groups that they're thinking about supporting into employment in their business, who might be underrepresented in their sector, etc. How they can align that with their levy transfer activity and who the learners are that they want to support into opportunities through that. And then the final example here is perhaps how levy transfer was initially conceived, really, being within sectors about supply chains and kind of wider business ecosystems. So this is a large tech business who depend on a really thriving ecosystem of smaller businesses who are kind of consulting, etc. within their space. And they are thinking very much about how their unspent levy can help those smaller businesses in their ecosystem to build the skills that they need. And, you know, in some ways that's perhaps the more selfish, if you like, of these three examples, in that they, you know, that is having very direct benefit for them as a large business. But, you know, three different ways that our donors think about how they can make levy transfer make strategic sense for them. And we're sometimes questioned on, like, does that levy transfer really make a difference? Is it really creating apprenticeships that wouldn't otherwise happen, etc.? You know, for some apprenticeship standards, clearly that 5% co-investment is not a huge amount of money. So there are just a couple of quotes here to illustrate from, in the words of businesses that have received that transfer, what that has meant to them. And I think in many cases it is about being able to, rather than single out one person perhaps for a progression opportunity through an apprenticeship, it means being able to offer that more equitably across more members of staff. You know, it might mean being able to think about, you know, a wider recruitment into entry-level roles, with apprenticeships to support progression as part of that, rather than, again, just being able to kind of offer one or two, etc. And on the kind of, on the standards which have a much higher cost attached to them, so, in construction, some of the tech and digital standards, etc., that 5% is genuinely a barrier for the smallest businesses. So absolutely, those are apprenticeships which wouldn't otherwise happen. But I think it's interesting to think about how that kind of plays out in different sectors and different businesses. And equally, we support a lot of entry-level opportunities in early years, in social care, where actually we know that the margins that those sectors are working with are so incredibly tight that 5% really can make a huge difference. So this is just an illustration of how we talk about the levy transfer process to businesses to try and simplify what can be really complicated. We very often are talking to large businesses who say, well, we've tried to do levy transfer and we advertised it and nobody was interested, all those kinds of things, or else they hit upon some kind of complexity. So really our role, as far as the large businesses are concerned, is just making this process really simple. So they tell us the amount of levy funds that they can pledge to us and what they broadly like to do with them. We've got an online pledge form that enables them to do that really easily. We receive requests from the small businesses that we're working with, that we're supporting. Some come to us through some of our training provider contacts. Others are businesses that we've supported right from that very early interest stage. So the donors aren't having to do anything to find recipients for their funds, essentially. Based on their criteria, we match them, and donors are able to decide on a case-by-case basis what they want to support. And then we will provide the kind of technical support to enable that transfer to happen, which essentially is a very simple process, as long as everybody does everything in the right order. And then just a few kind of FAQs, so the things that we frequently are asked by levy donors here. One is around, the kind of due diligence side of things. So how do they know that their funds are being used properly? Obviously, we reassure them that it all stays within the DAS, within the apprenticeship service account, so nothing is going into anybody's bank account that they could use for anything different, etc. And we do some due diligence ourselves. We talk businesses through the apprenticeship with the ESFA agreements that everybody signs up to on the DAS, etc. Which for most businesses is reassurance enough. We have a few particularly larger kind of legal and banking firms who are obviously very conscious of risk, who like to add some of their own processes into that as well. But for most businesses, that level of kind of faith in the system is generally sufficient. Businesses will, of course, ask us how we find employers to receive their funds, and we're doing lots of different activities to connect with small businesses who are in need of our wider support, but also of the funding support. That includes working with training providers who have businesses who need either a bit of extra help or who just need the funding support. But we also work with the local boroughs in London, with lots of business groups, etc., to get in front of their SME audiences to talk about apprenticeships. National Apprenticeship Week has obviously been a very busy one for that kind of thing. And we also then have businesses who come to us directly through our website, our social media channels, all that kind of thing. And then businesses often ask us about reporting back to them. So there's just a little bit on how we kind of manage that relationship once an apprenticeship has started there. And then lastly, before we move to questions, I just wanted to share, I guess, a few kind of more policy-ish insights or reflections on the system from our kind of practical work with businesses. So although we sit within, as I mentioned at the beginning, within IPPR, who are a research organisation, that is not our principal focus, nor is kind of policy influencing at the kind of forefront of what we do. We do that activity using insights from our kind of practical work. That is the kind of driver for some of the more kind of policy focused and influencing activity that we do. And I think to those of you working in the system, probably again, none of this is terribly revolutionary or kind of newsworthy on one level. I think the question of who benefits from apprenticeships is really paramount. I've talked about the drop in apprenticeships at lower levels for younger and more disadvantaged learners, and intrinsically, I think there is nothing wrong with apprenticeships that support other groups to progress. A lot of our work focuses on disadvantaged young people, but not exclusively so. And, you know, there have definitely been benefits around the perceptions of apprenticeships and other kind of wider benefits of the higher level apprenticeships, of, you know, more senior people in a business having been exposed to an apprenticeship themselves and becoming real advocates for apprenticeships. So there are lots of ways in which the system has benefited from apprenticeships becoming something perhaps broader than they were historically. But I think what we've lost a little bit is a real clarity around the kind of core purpose, and most of all, a focus on making sure that the people who we really want to be benefiting within the system are able to do so. So I think, you know, there's a real challenge around there that we'd certainly like to see addressed. Obviously, the majority of our work is around supporting small businesses to access the system. And I think, you know, in a lot of policy areas, this isn't unique to apprenticeships. We tend to think about the kind of carrots and sticks to, you know, incentivise and regulate and make sure things happen. And I think we lose sight of the need to put in support to enable, in this case, businesses. So in other policy areas that might be different, but the support to enable people to access those systems. If anyone's interested in our thoughts on that, we did a report last year funded by Gatsby Foundation called Joining the Dots, which was about the kind of necessity of a broader and kind of you know, cross England support service to make sure that small businesses can access the support they need to navigate the skill system more broadly, successfully. And then lastly, I think what we've seen right from the start of our work is that, you know, essentially we have relationships with lots of people doing great pre-employment work with groups of young people, other groups who have people ready for an apprenticeship. And we have lots of employers who have tried to recruit and struggled. And there's no, you know, other than us making kind of introductions, it's really difficult to make that connectivity work within the system. And I think, you know, where we see that working is probably on, you know, some of the place-based work, enabling that connectivity to work really well. And I think because apprenticeships don't currently fall in with other devolved aspects of the skills system, there's a real risk that apprenticeships are a bit of an outlier and perhaps don't kind of benefit from being part of that, but also then individuals are less able to benefit from apprenticeships. So yeah, lots of reasons why trying to enable those connections within the skills system, but more specifically with employers into the skills system to work a bit better. And I will leave it there. We have a few quotes from employers as to why they think apprenticeships, and this is our smaller employers, as to why they think apprenticeships have been really good. And I will leave it there, and hopefully we have a couple of minutes for any questions. But I will stop sharing my screen so that I can hopefully see everybody again.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please just put your hand up and I will call on you. Yes, Peter.
Hi there, hello. Thanks for the presentation, Anna. I work for the Royal Borough of Greenwich, and I know we've been in conversation with Workwhile already, and Jack Shaw recently attended the Apprenticeship Summit we had at the beginning of National Apprenticeship Week. Just a couple of quick questions. One is, what percentage of donor pledges do you actually ultimately transfer? And also, do the donors tend to pledge for 12 months or a longer period?
Good questions. So to take the second of those questions first, we have a real mixture. A lot will kind of pledge to us for an initial 12 months and then either repledge, or we just move into a kind of rolling system whereby we understand what it is they're looking to support, and we can kind of put requests to them on a kind of rolling basis. And if they're running out of funds available, they will let us know. So often after that first kind of 12 months or 2 years, we move on to a slightly more kind of flexible basis once we've developed that understanding with businesses. Your first question is really interesting. I don't have an overall percentage I can give you. What I would say is that it depends a lot on how restrictive or flexible a levy donor wants to be about how their funds are used. So, you know, we have some who are very specific in terms of the sector they want to support, or very specific in terms of the type of learners that they want to support. We have others who are happy to be much more broad and be led principally by demand. And obviously, the more flexible a business is willing to be within the parameters of what we charitably are looking to achieve, of course, the more flexible an organisation is able to be, the more we're able to use their funds. I think the thing which is which is a challenge for us and for some levy donors is around London Living Wage. Obviously, London Living Wage employers need to support opportunities that pay London Living Wage. We also want to be creating opportunities which pay that in an ideal world. We know for some sectors, particularly those where public sector, government contracts, etc., are paying at a lower rate than is really needed to kind of sustain that, that there are real challenges. So, where we can be a little flexible, we also understand that some donors, that is a red line, and we absolutely understand and support that. But it does sometimes limit what we're able to put in front of donors to support. So there are lots of factors that go into that.
Brand, thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks.
Hi, so now do you want to come on?
Hi, it's actually, I'm sitting with Sonal, who's my colleague, Ben Brody here from Impetus. Thank you so much, Anna. Really, really interesting presentation. Would just be interested to understand how you at Workwell think about your impact in the broadest sense. Obviously, you're working more with employers than individuals, or I imagine you work with both, but I'd just be interested in how you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what has been challenging from a funding perspective, given that we've kind of moved from a shortish term pilot into other kind of 2-year funding arrangements, etc., what has been difficult for us is being able to look at that impact sort of more longitudinally. So obviously we track the number of apprenticeships we're creating, who's benefiting from those, etc. We gather case study material at kind of 6 and 12 months points, etc., so that we're getting those stories of impact directly from the apprentices rather than just from the employers. We track completion, etc. What we would love to do is be able to track that over a kind of more longitudinal approach, because we know that a lot of those dividends of an apprenticeship actually pay off in 2 years and 3 years, etc., particularly for young people at the beginning of their journey. So there's a gap that we'd really like the opportunity to fill there, I think, in fully understanding that. Then in terms of just to talk a little bit about some of our other projects, so our line management work, which I talked about, is all about, if we've answered the question, can we create apprenticeships? Broadly speaking, yes. The next question is, well, can we make those better apprenticeships than they would be if we hadn't been involved with them in terms of the outcomes for learners? So that was really the kind of our first sort of approach to looking at that. And so for that, we've been tracking more closely the progression outcomes for those learners. And our next kind of challenge is to move as a kind of developing and growing organisation, is to move from being able to talk about kind of project impact to having a more kind of summative narrative way of talking about that and looking at that from an organisational perspective. But yeah, that's the longitudinal challenge is one that we're really keen to be able to look at.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. There's no hands up in the minute. I do actually have a question of my own, which I was going to ask. I know you mentioned that sort of COVID was kind of the start of when you're approaching big employers to redistribute their funds. I was sort of wondering how that's changed since the pandemic, if it has changed, and sort of what your wider processes around engaging big employers is.
It's been really interesting. So to start with, it was quite hard. The pandemic was definitely a kind of I guess kind of watershed in larger businesses, going from being really quite reluctant to think about losing control of these funds and these small businesses benefiting, and all that felt risky, to like, we really just want to do something. That, I think, gave us a really good pool of employers who were already working in apprenticeships, familiar with the system, etc. We've then spent, where are we now? Spent 2 years or so, maybe 3 years, having to go out and proactively talk to large employers and find ways to get large employers on board and transferring funds. We are now in a position where people are coming to us to ask if we can use their unspent levy funds. So I think as time progresses, I think the idea of levy transfer has become, you know, within the apprenticeships world, which is, albeit a little niche, has become more widely known, more widely accepted. There are more stories of very big organisations doing a lot of levy transfer and who are very willing to talk about how they conceptualise the kind of risk attached to it, reputational things, all that kind of thing. So yeah, you know, we've absolutely gone from having to be quite tenacious in getting through to the right, you know, combination of CSR people and apprenticeships and skills people and early talent people to make that happen, to actually not really having to put a huge amount of kind of time into that at the moment, and finding that people are, a lot of people coming to us wanting us to be able to use those unspent funds.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much, Anna, for your presentation and also for the questions you answered afterwards. Next up on the agenda, we have Eleanor from the Youth Futures Foundation, who's going to speak a little bit about the work they're doing and thinking they're doing on apprenticeships and vocational training.
Thanks so much, Jack, and thank you to Anna. It's amazing to follow you on an agenda. We are long-time supporters of Workwhile. Let me just get my slides up. You'll have to let me know if you can see them. Not coming up. Let me go the old school way.
I can see them now.
Yeah, okay, let me just put them on presenter. Great, okay, thank you very much for having us, ERSA. Most of you in the room will already know who we are, so I won't go through too much of our spiel, but I'll just quickly tell you a little bit about what my team is working on at the moment in terms of our evidence, being a What Works Centre, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a moment, but how we're trying to translate some of our evidence for an employer audience, which you can hopefully all help us with. So I'm Eleanor Marcy, I'm Engagement Manager at Youth Futures Foundation. Just really quickly, for those of you who are new to us, we are an independent non-profit. We were founded in 2019, so quite a young organisation. Have to stop saying that one day, but yeah, five years now, which does still feel quite young. We were established to essentially distribute a large pot of dormant assets funding across England, with the mission being to reduce employment gaps for young people facing some of the greatest challenges and barriers, and who are furthest away from the labour market. So it's all about really testing and investing in finding those young people good quality jobs. We are the National What Works Centre for Youth Employment. For those of you who haven't come across a What Works Centre before, to sort of put it really in simple terms, the What Works network basically aims, it's a sort of group of organisations that aims to improve the way that government and other public sector organisations are using evidence in decision making. So it's essentially about making sure that the evidence gets to the right people so that they can make really important decisions about where funding is spent and where resource goes to. What do we actually do? So what do we, day to day, what does Youth Futures Foundation do? Well, we try to work systemically, and we do that in three ways. We've got sort of three strands of work. The first one is about investing. So investing those dormant assets funding in promising practice. So that's with organisations who are delivering work that's really cool, really innovative, testing different approaches to getting young people into employment. And through that, so giving money out, long-term grants, we can then watch and observe. It's a really nice thing to do, is to really observe how they're working, what's working, and really sort of evaluate those sort of interventions, really sort of testing whether they are achieving the high outcomes that we want to see. And then obviously, being a What Works Centre, we've got a real commitment to generating evidence, because the evidence landscape with regards to youth employment is really like holy, and we really want to commit to filling the gaps. So we conduct and commission out high quality research that's helping us to gain insights as to what really does work in getting young people into employment. And then finally, with all of that knowledge and all of those insights, it's about influencing the system. That might be through influencing policy change, employer practice, really sort of pulling the levers to make sure that people are doing the right things and doing them more. So that leads me to tell you a little bit about what my team is doing. So I'm part of the employer engagement and partnerships team at Youth Futures, and our remit is all around supporting employers to better create opportunities, so more opportunities, but better opportunities to recruit and retain young people who perhaps wouldn't have found jobs without interventions. So specifically those young people from marginalised backgrounds. And it's not just about getting them into any job, it's about getting them into good jobs that are sustainable, that they can grow within, that they feel supported and seen by that employer. So that's what we're doing. A little bit of a visual for those of you who sort of find a visual helpful, just to show you exactly how we hope to achieve change. So basically, we've got Youth Futures. We sit on a ton of evidence, which we think is really impactful and important in sort of doing the right thing. So what we want to do is essentially get our evidence out there. And hopefully, if we do it in the right way, it will reach employers in the right way so that they will sort of enhance their practice or do different things or invest their money in different ways. So we're going to work through partners, so strategic partners who might support us with their insights. We'll be collaborating on producing tools, resources, networks. So us bringing our evidence, partners bringing their insights, audiences, expertise to produce things that will truly influence employer practice and help employers to do things differently or more inclusively, making their practices more accessible for young people who at the moment it doesn't seem to be really working for. So that's it. Our evidence is out there in the world, it's doing great things, but it's always a loop for us. We always want to hear back and we always want to be listening. So what are employers doing? How can we find out what is actually working? So we'll be doing things like trials, which is quite new. So really like studying and evaluating what employers are doing, whether that's an employer who thinks that they're onto something really good. It might be that they're using AI in their recruitment. It might be that they're doing the line management training with Workwhile, and really sort of observing, is it working for them? Are the outcomes of these young people really improved because of this intervention? And if so, let us scale it up. Let us sort of invest in it more and get others to be doing more of it. So it's always a loop, getting our evidence out and finding out more. So evidence coming in. One of the biggest assets that Youth Futures has that you probably, most of you have heard about and hopefully you're using it, is our Youth Employment Toolkit. So it was launched last year in July. Essentially, in layman's terms, it's a repository of evidence, so really high quality evidence about youth employment interventions. At the moment, the toolkit has about 8 interventions that have been sort of the evidence has been curated on, apprenticeships being one, on-the-job training. We've got wage subsidy schemes, the list goes on. We're going to have around 2, so more interventions are going to be added towards the end of this year. And the toolkit has been really successful in supporting those who, again, make decisions about what to invest in. It's a way of sort of weighing up, okay, if we had to bet on a horse, which one would it be? So it's been really helpful for policymakers, decision makers, practitioners, really hoping that a couple of you in the room will have used it. But what we're finding is that employers just need a little bit of support and translation to work with the evidence and to make sure that their practice is really informed by the evidence in the toolkit, which is why we have recently launched something called Toolkit Unwrapped, which kind of does what it says on the tin. It unwraps all of the evidence, really putting it in employer-friendly language and bringing it to life. So it's resources, it's case studies, a real curation of things that we hope that employers will be able to kind of take away, okay, what is it that I need to do? what is the challenge for me. So we're really happy that February marked an opportunity to launch this series with our apprenticeship edition in celebration of National Apprenticeship Week. And so that's what I'm going to go on to tell you a little bit more about, is what actually is included in our apprenticeship toolkit Unwrapped edition. But let's just make sure that you're all awake. I know it's a grey Thursday morning, so some of you might be struggling. I know that I would be. Let's do a quiz. And I'm expecting your answers in the chat if you can. I'm just going to give you 1 minute to pop some answers to these 3 questions. I'll read them out for you and then I'll reveal the answers. So first question, what year was the first official apprenticeship system created in England? So what year was the first official apprenticeship system created in England? I'm gutted that I think I'm going to miss out on all the chat. So I'll have to check them after, but I don't think I can see the chat at the moment. Question 2, what is the minimum hourly wage for an apprentice aged 16 to 18 at the moment? So February 2024, what is the minimum hourly wage for an apprentice aged 16 to 18? And finally, the third question is, what qualifications do you need to start a level 2 apprenticeship? What qualifications do you need to start a level 2 apprenticeship? So answers in the chat, I'll just give you a moment and then I'll reveal the answers, just checking that you're all still here. Okay. Hopefully you've at least started thinking about the first question. So I'm going to do the big reveal and we'll find out whether you are in or whether you've been fired. Question 1, the answer was, and this was what was the first sort of apprenticeship was launched, what year? It was 1563 by the Statute of Artificers. I'm thinking some sort of stonework or something, maybe quite a long time ago. What's the minimum hourly wage for an apprentice aged 16 to 18? It is £5.28 at the moment. Not a lot, is it? And what qualifications do you need to do a level 2? None. But you might be asked to continue your GCSE, Maths and English or functional skills at college, which you probably all know. But that's the beautiful thing about a level 2. And that's in reflection of some of the things that Anna was saying in her presentation. It's a real shame that we're seeing a decline in the offering of level 2 and level 3, because they're obviously incredibly accessible for those who haven't yet got their GCSEs in Maths and English. How did you do? I'm looking forward to looking in the chat. I'm sorry that I can't see all of your answers, but no doubt you did perfectly. Right, I'm going to move on with the presentation. So let's unwrap the toolkit on apprenticeships. First of all, just sort of like setting the scene a little bit. What's the need? Apprenticeships have been done for ages, since 1563 apparently. But why do we need them? Why do we really need to talk about this today? Well, some of our evidence shows that there is a stark problem that isn't really getting better, and that we need to be continuing to diversify the way that young people are offered pathways into employment. So at the moment, there's nearly 800,000 young people who are NEET, and that figure, well, not that figure, but the sort of statistic, the proportion of young people out of work, out of education, employment and training hasn't really fallen in the last 2 decades. So we've all been really chugging away at these, really innovative, amazing interventions, and that sort of level hasn't really waned. It's not fallen below 10% of young people being out of work, out of employment, educational training. We know from our research that young people with experience of the care system or who have been looked after are 4 times more likely to be NEET, which is quite stark when you think about it. In the year up to June 2022, unemployment rates were highest for Black young people, so at 21% compared to 9% for their white peers, which is a sort of stat that you can't really look away from. And we found that the proportion of NEET young people is highest amongst those from Pakistani and Bangladeshi backgrounds, which has led us to invest in some really incredible programs that are specifically focusing on supporting Pakistani and Bangladeshi young people across England. What does the evidence say about apprenticeships? Okay, so actually unwrapping the toolkit, we can tell you that for every 10 young people who take part in an apprenticeship as a targeted youth employment intervention, one of those young people will get a job who wouldn't have done so without the intervention. And that's not to say that the other 9 young people won't get a job, but perhaps it was more inevitable that, you know, whatever pathway they took, they would have eventually got into work. But this one young person, the likelihood that they would have remained NEET is likely. So we think that this is a really positive story. We can also tell from the toolkit that apprenticeships have a high, or could have a high, positive impact on youth employment outcomes. So again, it gives a really good sort of narrative for if you were going to bet on a horse, if it was going to be one or the other, youth employment intervention, apprenticeships is a really strong one to go with. And we hope that that will be considered when employers are sort of looking to invest in, you know, things that will change the dial for young people from marginalised backgrounds. But then, of course, these positive stories are sort of paired with Workwhile and Anna's sort of finding that since 2014, 2015, entry-level apprenticeships have really plummeted by 72%, which is quite a lot. There's tons and tons of benefits for employers. And I think what we're trying to do as an organisation, I don't know if any of you are finding it also, is that as much as we can talk about all of the like corporate social responsibility and the investor, you know, benefits that employers can gain through doing the right thing, there is actually real benefit for an employer. It's not just, you know, an altruistic sort of mission. Employers with more diverse teams have 36% better financial gains, which kind of make it a little bit of an economic no-brainer. We all know that the pipeline of talent for an employer who can develop those skills internally, which are really relevant to their industry or organisation, is only going to sort of benefit their long-term workforce planning. But we also know through, we've done some research with PwC, their Youth Employment Index, that reduced NEET rates sort of nationally could add up to 38 billion to our economy. So there is a really a sort of a wider economic sort of case for this. The research that we are doing at the moment is really sort of delving into the disparity of opportunities and experiences that those from ethnically minoritized backgrounds are facing. And we've got some emerging research that's specific to sort of diversity and apprenticeships that we'll be sharing later this year. But I can share with you a few sort of first cut, I guess, bits of information, insights from that research. So the first one is that young apprentices from minority ethnic backgrounds have lower achievement, retention and pass rates than their white peers. Perhaps not surprising to you, but when, you know, we have that evidence there, we can't avoid it, and it's really important that we have that evidence so that we can then try and find ways to counteract that. A third of apprentices who have dropped out of their programme felt that a lack of support from their employer had contributed to their decision to leave. So that's a really important piece of the puzzle in trying to influence employers to do things differently and to think differently about the support that they're offering. A really positive thing that's come out of our workplace discrimination survey this year. It's an annual survey that we do with young people from ethnically minoritized backgrounds. I think it's around 2,000 or so young people who are surveyed. 22% of those young people, in response to facing discrimination in the workplace, wanted to see the government guarantee apprenticeship placements for themselves and their peers as a way of directly tackling discrimination and disparity of opportunities. And that's a really positive thing, because it's telling us that there is a real desire. There's a real sort of acknowledgement that apprenticeships could solve some of the systemic sort of inequalities that we're seeing. So on to the juicy bit, and I don't know if we've got any employers in the room, and perhaps I'm speaking to the sort of converted, but really what I'm sharing these sort of recommendations for employers with you is to ask for your help. So any of you who are sort of working with employers, these are the evidence-based sort of recommendations that if they just take these steps, you know, small tweaks tomorrow, you know, changing things, just slowly changing the way that they sort of operate and their culture, these things will have an impact on sort of closing that gap. So I'll ask you for your help to share these recommendations at the end of the presentation. The first one is around targeted outreach and recruitment. And it's sort of encouraging employers not just to sit and scratch their heads and say, oh, we've got a real underrepresentation, I wonder why that is. Well, actually, going out into the community, really investing in getting to know those target groups is only going to sort of draw people in, not only to their company, but into apprenticeships, sort of really, helping to sort of level some of those statistics. So taking a localized approach on this is always beneficial. What we're finding in quite a lot of our place-based work that we're doing at Youth Futures Foundation is that the opportunities and barriers faced in London and Blackpool and Hastings and Hull are really unique, and it really does take an employer getting out into the community. That could be through mentoring in schools and colleges, it could be through community events, sponsoring the local youth football team, you know, really getting to know who are these people, like who are the people who could be our sort of employees of the future. We found that employers are having real success with supporting the current apprentices to act as role models, but not just expecting that, but properly providing the coaching, support and training that's needed to not only enable them to be an ambassador for the company, but also to be an ambassador for apprenticeships more widely. It's about promoting opportunities through non-traditional networks and really sort of thinking about some of the barriers that some groups of young people might face with sort of access to sort of online. So, you know, like access to things like LinkedIn, lack of sort of social capital, not knowing the right people to sort of know where to look. So this could be anything like promoting opportunities at career fairs, community notice boards, newsletters that you wouldn't have thought of. Even TikTok, we've heard employers talking about, getting onto TikTok and just, you know, really changing the way that they're thinking about recruiting. Obviously, recruitment materials tell a whole story about, you know, what a young person can expect. So really addressing underrepresented groups, whether that's through visual representation, providing accessible alternative ways to sort of apply, but also calling it out. What is the underrepresentation? Are you trying to get men into health and social care? Is it that you want young women in sort of construction roles, and really sort of like calling those young people to apply? It's about the inclusive policies and practices that you have. I'm sure that, you know, employers are really working hard on things like flexible working and inclusive practice, but it's about advertising that from day one, so that those young people who faced barriers to even thinking about applying for an apprenticeship would know that the fact that they're a young carer is welcomed, and that they can have a conversation about that from day one. Or, you know, the fact that they've got a long-term health condition isn't going to be, you know, just a barrier, an awkward conversation in week one. It's welcomed on the recruitment materials. And just consistency, really, making sure that if there's a reasonable adjustment to be made, that it's there for everyone, and that, consistency in recruitment is really, really prioritised. I'll move quickly on to, let me just check how long I've got. The second recommendation is inclusive line management, which absolutely, I'm so glad that Anna went before me, because their line management training is just a fantastic example of why all employers should really invest in this. There's this sort of age-old trope that people don't leave an organization or a company, they leave a line manager, and it's actually evidenced. There is evidence out there to suggest that, yeah, line management is a really big reason for people dropping out. And we know that sort of dropout and non-completion rates for apprenticeships are a concern at the moment. So it's line management training that's needed really for all leaders. Sometimes because of the way that employers are structured, it means that the least experienced line managers often get lumbered with like apprenticeships and entry level roles, but actually it takes quite a skilled line manager to support an apprentice, especially one with additional needs. So it's encouraging line managers to become really experienced and really skilled in things like transformational and inclusive styles. I think the definition of a transformational leader is to motivate and influence by paying attention to that person's needs and interests. And by doing that, you can really unlock potential. And if a line manager, isn't skilled in supporting someone with additional needs, or if someone's got particularly unique sort of barriers in sort of employment, then that one-to-one support that can be sourced externally, whether that's an external coach or mentor or a support service, that's really encouraged to sort of like work in partnership and as a system in your own right. And peer support networks for managers of apprentices, it's really effective. So sharing good practice within the employer or wider. And just making sure that those line managers, everyone should be empowered in an employer to sort of activate all the policies that really make sure that marginalised people at large are sort of protected, supported and nurtured, but particularly managers need to be making sure that, those requests for flexible working, the requests for reasonable adjustments and the reports of things like discrimination are absolutely activated to make sure. And it's this thing about culture. It's all about building an inclusive culture. And rather than waiting for people to ask or report, making sure that those things are like visible and really prioritized from day one. And finally, won't come as a surprise to you, so I won't go into it too much, but working in partnership. Some of the employers that we've been doing case studies with, this is really the key for them. It's working in partnership to make sure that the employer isn't working in silo from the apprenticeship provider, and just making sure that there's a real line of communication and sort of really collaborating from stage one of implementation and design, making sure that all parties know exactly what their roles and responsibilities are. This is where we've seen amazing success. Employers being open and welcoming for training providers and other partners to really visit them on site so that they can see exactly what an apprentice is doing every day and really understanding the industry needs, so that it's all just a fantastically joined up approach, and making sure that, that apprentice hasn't got too much on their plate, and making sure that those real peak moments in their study, their employment are really sort of like noted and acknowledged. So to summarise, the 3 things that we'd love for you to recommend to any employer who wants to know how they can do apprenticeships really well, it's the inclusive line management, so getting their line managers really skilled and trained. It's working in partnership. And oh my goodness, I've forgotten the first one. It's the outreach, it's the targeted outreach. And if they're seeing underrepresentation across their workforce, like going out there and really like finding out about that community. So those are the 3 things. So please support us by telling all the employers that you work with. And then, of course, we know that one of the biggest sort of incentives, motivators, almost demotivators as well, is all around financial financial sort of factors for employers. It's, can we afford it? What's in it for us? Is it going to help us? Is it going to drain resources? Well, basically, a lot of employers don't know that there is a government incentive for all employers who are willing to host an apprentice aged 16 to 18 or a 19 to 25-year-old who has an EHCP. Again, you probably all know this, but please continue to remind employers that you work with that this is there. It's £1,000. And they can spend it on things that would support that apprentice to sort of adapt to the workplace, whether that's uniforms, adaptive technology, bus passes, the list goes on. We as an organisation are recommending that the government increases that to £3,000, because we think that that will essentially have the biggest impact on young people, such as care leavers who do need that additional help. It might be that they don't have a passport, and that the employer can support with that, get their first ID. You know, the list really does go on. So please continue to remind employers that that is there for them. There's some, I'll send this slide deck over and the links in there. So thanks for listening. Really, really great to see you all. How can you help us? And just going back to that quite complicated sort of loop of how we want to achieve change. Please share our tools and resources with your networks, whether they're employers or not. There's something for everyone, really. So please do dig into our website, have a look, share them out in your newsletters. We'd be so grateful. Help us to amplify good employer practice by telling us if you've got employers in your network that are doing great work. Let us talk to them, do a case study so that we can influence more employers to do more of the good stuff. And then let us know what you're hearing. As the What Works Centre for youth employment, we're not just focused on apprenticeships. We've got some really exciting emerging evidence that comes year on year that we're really excited to share with you. If you're finding that there's gaps in what you need evidence on, please be in touch and let us know what you're thinking, because it might tie into some of our plans. And just stay connected, really. I'm going to share this deck with you so that you'll be able to access those resources. But thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Eleanor. I wonder if anyone has any questions. Again, feel free to put your hands up and come in. John.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, morning, everybody, and thank you for that, Eleanor, as well. I think there's some astonishing statistics on the lack of progress there, and you've prompted me because I have spoken to some of your colleagues before, so I'll get back in touch with them. I want to say three things. What works? Do you know? And you probably don't, and I'll sound like a broken record here. DWP defend their right not to learn what works. So if we want to know why we've got so many needs still, that is that's part of the problem. Can you still hear me? Because my screen's just changed there.
Yeah, mine has as well. I'm not sure what's happening, but we
All
can
right,
hear you,
sorry.
Jen.
That's
So-
me doing something. Just ignore it. It's
All
for the
right,
next
I'm
bit
easily
of the call.
confused, Jack. And it's Thursday. So yes, that's the first problem. So you've then got to ask what Treasury are measuring in terms of return on investment or not, because there's all this effort put into what works. And if you've got government organisations who purposefully don't want to know or think that they can't know because of procurement law, etc., that's a massive challenge. Second thing is employers. I think this is really, and I get everything you've said and I agree, but I've seen this for 15 years now. We can't just dump everything on the employers. The system has to take its share of ownership as well, and that starts in Whitehall departments. The social mobility PPG found that the system was the issue, and that was more than a decade ago. So I think there needs to be some tougher conversations and challenge within that, because dependent on where you are in the country, between a third and 2/3 of employers will not touch any publicly funded employment programs, including apprenticeships. So you've got to see why. And one of the reasons why, as an employer, albeit a small employer, this is how ridiculous this stuff is, because when you lose credibility, you can't get it back. I got a call. I was being pursued last year and eventually took the call by a guy who was working for the Department for Education, but wasn't allowed to say who he was actually working for, which is a bad start. And he wanted to talk to me about apprenticeships, and he's trying to sell it on the basis I'll get somebody cheap, and in terms of which is never a good look. But the closest provider, I'm in Hertfordshire, the closest provider for us was going to be in Leeds. So he made no sense whatsoever, has no credibility whatsoever. And he's not just talking to me, he's probably talking to hundreds of thousands of employers, and they're going, "You've got to be kidding me." So that's a reality check. But why is he doing that? That's a Whitehall department. I know there's some good people in there who've tried, but there's also some people who aren't listening as well. So, but I'll drop your guys a line on this, because it's prompted me. You might have a response for that, you might not. But there you go.
A couple of things spring to mind. Thank you so much, John. I think we all share your frustration on this. Yeah, those stark statistics around things haven't really changed in the last 20 years, despite everyone in this room really working their socks off to provide, you know, just the most fantastic opportunities for young people. And it really feels like we're having successes ourselves. But when you look at the bigger picture, it can be quite, demotivating, can't it? Well, a couple of things. One piece of work that we've got coming up, you talked about the return on investment. We are actually investing in building a tool that's really early stage at the moment, but it will help local areas to look at sort of like funding flows. We've got our data dashboards, but this new tool is around that economic return on investment that will be really, really helpful for decision makers, and it will be something that they can't really look away from. We're having some really, really fruitful conversations with local authorities who are really engaged, and so we're really just keen to support that work, to observe it, and then to share the learnings from it so that other local authorities can sort of follow in suit. On the DWP piece, yeah, it's always difficult because the priorities, you know, within these government departments are so sort of there's a lot going on. But we've been really lucky in that we've got a youth voice. Well, we've got our Future Voices group, which is a group of young people who are representative of the young people who we're there to sort of serve. And DWP meet with a group of those young people who've had experience of being NEET. And so they're working together to drive policy change that's really got youth voice at the centre. And that's been a real achievement for our organisation, I think, because it's really rare to get that time with civil servants, but they're really willing. They've been really, really like open to it. So we're really excited to see what comes from that. And then on putting everything on the employers, totally agree. Absolutely agree. And I think we're really mindful in our messaging that it's really important that we make it as easy as possible for employers, but also to realise that it's not a hard slog and that they will get loads out of it. There are so many fantastic organisations such as Anna's Workwhile, who can work in partnership to take that load off of employers. So we'd encourage working in partnership as much as possible. But the other thing that we are really recommending that the government do is to better invest in youth hubs. It's a massive key. Because, you know, what we're finding is that employers are having to deal with, you know, this sort of social needs, the complex social needs of young people who are being failed by other parts of the system, such as the mental health, NHS. So if youth hubs are better funded, then employers won't have to carry that burden. So that's something that we're really driving in our policy recommendations. So thank you, John. I've made notes. That's really.
I think on that as well, Anna, because it's look, I know some of the policy people who were really committed on youth and everything else, right? And then they disappear. And the reason it gets stuck is because they can't get what they want through commercials. So you go, well, where's the leadership? Is this a director general? Is it the perm sec? Is it the minister? Is it the secretary of state? It's none of them, right? None of them are going near that. And that's now I'm doing all sorts of stuff to try and unpick that. But if you go back to what's the cost on this and go back to Treasury, if we've got 800,000 NEETs and we've got a welfare bill that continues to rise, Why aren't you doing anything? Oh, that's right, we did Kickstarter. It was brilliant, wasn't it? It was a massive success. They gave half the money back to Treasury. Oh, maybe it wasn't. And that's what isn't happening. And I think, you know, don't get me wrong, I've got a certain style, but I think we need crunchier challenge for some of these people. And this is more than 20 years. I went to see Standing at the Sky's Edge yesterday, which is the story of Sheffield and what was going on there. Absolutely brilliant. You know, regeneration was my background. This has been going on a lot longer than 20 years.
Yeah.
And we have to see it's not good enough. And that's uncomfortable, but we have to see it's not good enough.
Yeah. And let's hope that the general election this year marks an opportunity for us all to sort of sing from the same hymn sheet, and maybe that's a challenge for us.
It's the same thing, and I'm talking to Labour as well, but it's the same thing. What do we expect the same civil servants to do differently? Local authorities have been weakened, if you like, by a lot of this, partly because they haven't had the money for it. So there's a huge paradigm shift that's required, which we're trying to help with. Anyway, sorry, it's not my show. I'm just getting on my high horse. All right, cheers.
Thanks, John, and
Thanks, John.
thanks, Eleanor. I was trying to share the Mentimeter in Teams, but it kept breaking my Teams and kicking me out. So as there's only 36 of us left and we've got about 14 minutes, I'm just going to ask some of the questions that I was going to ask on Mentimeter, and we'll do it a bit of the old-fashioned way with your kind participation, I hope. So in preparation for this last week, I was reading a Resolution Foundation report from October of last year, and one of the headline stats of that was that the number of apprenticeship starts for those under 25 is lower today than it was in 2010. And I was wondering if colleagues on the call have any opinion about how we kind of could start to change that, what we're doing wrong, maybe what we were doing right 14 years ago that we're doing wrong now. So yeah, very happy to take any input. Just stick your hand up.
I've got a view, Jack, and I don't deliver apprenticeships, but and it builds on what I've just said. If you want to survive as an organisation, it's a game, and you've got to play the game, and you've got to tell the commissioners what they want to hear. And it's, for too many organisations, it's become more about survival than serving the needs. I've got a whole presentation on this, which I've used for more than a decade. It's not about serving the needs of the employer, and it's not about serving the needs of the individual. And that's what's wrong. And you know, that's the change that's needed. WMCA did some really good work about 5 years ago, and they looked at what was actually there on the ground, and a lot of it was poor quality, low level. And if you've got that, what do you expect to happen? You can't go to an employer, right, here, I've got somebody for you now, and they're going, you're kidding me. Because they're just not going to do it. So immigration was the answer for years for a lot of them, rightly or wrongly. And now we've got a system that hasn't really been able to adapt. And what's missing from this, and this is one of the things that we do, is the whole psychological piece, because the main thing most employers are looking for is attitude. Most will hire for attitude and train for skill. And if that attitude piece isn't there, which it isn't for most of them, and you can argue that sits with DWP as opposed to DFE, toast. Hence, we've got a growth problem.
Well, I think we definitely have in this report, one of the things that comes out is for the 50% of young people who go to university, we're really good at that. And then for the 50% that don't, in terms of providing education sort of at 18 and upwards, we're, as a nation, really bad at that, and in comparison to other nations in Europe. So I think it's interesting.
There's also, if you look at that, within, and I think the last figures I saw were from 2013, but there's a lot of people who go to university who get jobs that they didn't need a degree for. So this is getting completely skewed, because that then skews the other market. So if I'm a graduate and I'm taking a job that I didn't need a degree for, I'm keeping somebody who hasn't got a degree out of that job.
Definitely. Well, is it Ben or with one of the two of you who sat with your
It's Ben again. Sure. Ben again. We're just trying to keep you on your toes, Jack.
Definitely.
It's kind of, I guess it's a question rather than like an answer to yours. Is that okay? It's a question posed to others. I guess it's to fellow philanthropists or others who have views. Like, yes, there's a problem, there's a challenge in terms of access to apprenticeships, but also other vocational skills, right? And it's going down. I'd be very interested to understand people's views on like what donors can do. I'm talking about donors as in philanthropists as opposed to donors transferring their apprenticeship levy from earlier. Yeah, because we at Impetus, like we back some skills providers, we fund and back some skills providers who provide apprenticeships, who provide boot camps. Like that's one route. The challenge is that, in my experience, there aren't that many actually non-profit providers who aren't necessarily like there are kind of universities and the others. And maybe that is the route. I'm just interested in as to other people's views, like specific things that people funders can do. If that's not too specific a question, that's interested.
I think that's a great question. It's probably not one that I can answer, but hopefully there's someone in the room who thinks they might have something to contribute to that. Tommy, if you want to come in.
Yeah, just to try touching all of it that's been discussed in the last question as well. I think it's really powerful messages and clear messages coming across this morning around the importance of in-work support and supporting particularly vulnerable young people to make that journey from the pre-employment or pre-apprenticeship delivery that's there and safely and securely accessing the apprenticeship or job opportunity, but also the importance of someone being there to continue to support the young person and the employer. And a lot of the feedback we get is around the importance of just some simple interventions that practically help that young person with an issue that the employer quite understandably may say, well, actually, what are you coming to work with that issue? Why is that getting in the way of you coming to work? But they're important for that young person. So these non-work related issues can quite often get in the way in our experience of young people sustaining participation in jobs or apprenticeships, particularly in the early stages. On the issue of apprenticeships, levy, opening up the funding through levy pots for big employers and levy payers saying, well, we want to use this money, and being allowed to use significant proportions of that for other learning and development opportunities for existing employees has just over the past 7 years, year on year, reduced the opportunities for young people to access apprenticeships. And I think something policy-wise needs to be done about that. Pandemic's had a huge impact on young people's participation and achievement of their apprenticeship. There is something within the apprenticeship sector that people aren't happy about, and question the role of functional skills and the need to have to achieve a certain level of maths and English as part of participation and achievement of apprenticeships in the first place. And, you know, what value completely do employers place on that when a young person is in an apprenticeship with them? Small employers, a lot of the great stuff around sharing levy funding to support small employers, but do small employers, even in micro employers as well, the 1-2 person business, do they even have the ability to pay the 5%, never mind anything else? And no, in our view, that 5% thing shouldn't really even be there for micro and small employers. It should be something that, you know, if you want to take somebody on an apprenticeship as a small micro employer, you get the full support that you need. So there's a lot going on around, to us, about funding and making the access and the pathways into apprenticeships a lot clearer and easier for people, particularly those young people who Youth Futures have highlighted as, you know, being particularly marginalised and excluded from access to the world of work. So there's a lot around there around opening up pathways for them and giving them full opportunities to achieve that. But for us, I think it's about continuing in work in an apprenticeship support that's really there that makes a difference. In Scotland, you can tell by my accent, but in Scotland, the Modern Apprenticeship Programme in Scotland, the statistics will tell you about 75% of young people on the Modern Apprenticeship Programme achieve their qualification, they achieve their apprenticeship. But when you drill down for care experienced young people, it's 20% less, it's about 55% actually achieve. So it tells you that, you know, there's things going on, that additional support's needed for a lot of vulnerable young people to achieve their apprenticeship. And I think that's missing across the UK.
Fantastic contribution. Thank you, Tommy. I also think there's a bit of an elephant in the room when it comes to the wage for apprenticeships. I know obviously in London there's a lot of work being done around the London living wage. But realistically, if someone's 18, wherever they're living in the UK, and they can earn, you know, £11-12 an hour working in Tesco's or Sainsbury's, but going the apprenticeship route, we've cut that wage in half. You can see how that becomes a real issue. Yes, Joe, if you want to.
The one thing I would say about that is a lot of the people we're working with are already claiming universal credit anyway. So because apprenticeships form part of like an earning criteria, they're never going to be worse off doing it anyway. So we're doing a lot of work to try and encourage claimants to use apprenticeships to get back into the job market, to become more supported in the workplace, and adults, because obviously anyone can do this, because as long as you're already signed up with universal credit, you're not going to be doing any disadvantage to yourself anyway. So initially, yes, completely agree. They go, oh, that's the minimum wage, but it's not, because the reality is they're already on universal credit. That's the minimum they're going to get anyway. At least they're moving forward and their employability chances improve.
Yeah, I suppose that kind of connects with what Eleanor put in the chat about it being about education, not just of young people, but of their parents and carers as well. And I suppose in schools and out schools and in youth hubs and everywhere, really just having more of a coherent message about these routes.
I think the bigger concern is probably on parents being worried about losing their own income because of the extra earning in the household.
Okay, well, we've got about 4 minutes left, but if there's no other burning points, then I'll give everyone 4 minutes of their day back. Thank you very much to everyone who spoke, everyone who attended, everyone who contributed to the discussion. It's greatly appreciated. We've got a really good forum lined up for next month alongside the Youth Futures Foundation that I'm going to be announcing when I send around the slides and the recording of this. So please look out for that and register. And until then, we will see you next month. Thanks a lot, everyone, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.